We have multiple surprising Islanders updates with insiders revealing shocking information that really sheds light into what the Islanders' plan is going to be this offseason, and this is going to upset a lot of fans, but I do think this is the right path for General Manager Mathew Darche moving forward. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Islanders Digest, but really quickly before we get into that, we notice that 72% of you who watch these videos are not yet subscribed to the channel. This is actually the best this chart has looked so far, so thank you to the 27.7% of you who have already subscribed to the channel. It really helps on our goal to hit 1,000 subscribers before the NHL draft. But if you haven't already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button. It's free, and be a part of this Islanders community. Now let's get right into today's updates. Arthur Staple posted a couple different updates on the New York Islanders and what Mathew Darche and Patrick Roy are going to be busy with this offseason. And one of the big things that caught my attention right away is we finally get an update on Anthony Duclair. We really heard nothing about Anthony Duclair since he took his leave of absence last season, and now Arthur Staple is reporting that he is likely to report to training camp, which is definitely what you want to see, both as an Islander fan and as a person. Anthony Duclair had perhaps one of the worst seasons for the Islanders we've seen in a long while, especially considered he was brought in to be a fix in the top six and was really considered to be a move that was supposed to be the Islanders' attempt at beefing up their offense. Clearly, looking at the stats this season, it did not work at all. Anthony Duclair actually looked really good in his first few games for the New York Islanders. It was actually looking like this experiment might work. And then he got injured. He hurt his groin, and things did not look the same since then. He came back to play about 38 games after the injury, but you can tell something was not right, and the stats just paint the full picture. Only 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points in 44 games for Duclair, a minus 15 in just 44 games, which really puts in perspective how poor he was defensively, and especially when you compare this to other seasons with Anthony Duclair. I mean, just a few years ago, he put up 58 points in Florida, only playing 54 games. Clearly, something was not right with him, and there really were questions, especially with how things ended. Patrick Roy calling out his terrible play, rightfully say, using some choice words, calling his play god-awful. The next day, Anthony Duclair was not present in morning skates, and there was some speculation that he would be a healthy scratch. We then got news from Patrick Roy later that day that Anthony Duclair would be taking a leave of absence, which really opened up a ton of questions for Islander fans that really were never addressed or answered. I mean, nobody talked about it at Darche's press conference. He wasn't at locker room cleanup, and we really didn't know what was going on, and now we have a solid update, and this is definitely what you want to see, especially as a person when you were really wondering if something was going on with Anthony Duclair, if he was struggling with some mental health issues. There was a lot of speculation out there. Not really going to speculate on what was going on. All that's really important is that he's coming back to training camp, and hopefully he can have a good season. This update comes from Andrew Gross of Newsday. The tweet is from Isles Updates, who actually subscribe to the channel, so I appreciate their support, and it's really helpful when they cover the Islanders on X for posts like these from Newsday, where it's behind a paywall, and therefore we can't post the screenshots. And basically, there was an interview between Andrew Gross and GM Mathew Darche, and Darche revealed that Anthony Duclair is expected to be ready for training camp and is in good spirits. And that good spirits is exactly what you want to hear. Not only in terms of hopefully he's doing better with whatever was bothering him last year, both physically and mentally, but in addition, this is a player who had some issues with the coach. So it's good to know that things seem to be like they're going in a better direction. It seems like they are on a good page, considering that Patrick Roy has already confirmed to be coming back. They're going to have to work together whether they like it or not. And my hope really is that Anthony Duclair can come back to being a productive forward. Now, I don't expect him to explode and have another 58-point year, but 11 points in 44 games, a 22-point pace, is not what you expect from Anthony Duclair. My hope is that he can bring at least a 40-point pace to really be a decent second, third line option for the New York Islanders, especially in this year where it's really going to be a transition year, which is what we're getting to next when it comes to the New York Islanders. It sounds like there is not going to be a ton of change with the New York Islanders, especially when it comes to the buyout department, because it has been reported that Mathew Darche in that interview kind of put to bed those rumors that Scott Mayfield and Pierre Engvall are going to be bought out. And if you notice, when we made our video on buyout candidates for the New York Islanders, the 3 candidates we talked about were Anthony Duclair, Scott Mayfield, and Pierre Engvall. Mathew Darche saying he expects Anthony Duclair at training camp is also pretty much saying he is not going to buy him out. So we now basically have confirmation, although things can happen, especially if there is a need for money right away for Mathew Darche. But as of right now, we have a pretty good indication that there will be no buyouts, and largely we are going to have the same Islanders roster returning next season, which is also confirmed by Arthur Staples' tweet saying the Islanders are not looking to perform major roster surgery yet. Now, I know this is not going to excite a lot of fans. We want change after what was a very disastrous season for the New York Islanders last season, where they took a step back, and on top of everything, were not very entertaining to watch. This was a team that was hard to watch. And in the past, the Islanders have iced some pretty slow teams, and it wasn't an issue when they were winning. Last year, the Islanders were not winning, which is why we expected some more change. But I'm going to argue that that change should not be buying out Scott Mayfield or Pierre Engvall, and perhaps this is not the worst way for the Islanders to go, to really give Darche a year to evaluate what he has on this team, maybe make some changes in terms of the people who are on expiring deals, such as Pageau or Anders Lee. But maybe that's better for the deadline, as we actually talked about in previous videos, really focusing on Scott Mayfield last season. Sure, he didn't put up a ton of points, only 9.66 games, but he's a defenseman. You don't put him out there to score a bunch of points. And that's almost on track for what you typically expect from Scott Mayfield. He's a guy that's going to give you, at most, 15, 20 points. Not really an offensive guy. What he provides is his big size and defense. And based on the stats, especially considering how bad of a team the Islanders were defensively last year, being a plus 18, Scott Mayfield was good defensively. Now, you got to keep in mind when it comes to plus minus, that does not factor in the penalty kill, where Scott Mayfield did struggle a bit more, but what Islanders defenseman did not struggle on the penalty kill. What is really interesting about Mathew Darche being high on Scott Mayfield, especially when you listen to some of his interviews so far, the way he's talked about Scott Mayfield, he does seem to be pretty high in the player. Now, it does make a little bit of sense considering that Scott Mayfield was very effective against the Tampa Bay Lightning when the Islanders did compete in that series. But Scott Mayfield doesn't quite fit that game that Mathew Darche has been talking about, with more speed, more energy, better defense. He's kind of a big, slow-footed defense, and while the defensive metrics are not bad, you maybe would have expected the Islanders to go in another direction, although now these comments kind of indicate they are keeping Scott Mayfield. And while I'll be interested to see how Scott Mayfield plays another year, especially in a year knowing that Patrick Roy still can be coach, and Patrick Roy clearly is not high on Scott Mayfield, you do also have to keep in mind that while perhaps it's not the best idea for the Islanders to keep Scott Mayfield long term, I also don't think, based on these numbers, that it makes sense to buy him out. I've talked about in our previous videos where we talk about buyouts, there are long-term consequences to buying out Scott Mayfield and any player. That's just how buyouts work. And while it would save the Islanders $2 million for the next 5 seasons, it would also cost them $1 million for the next 10, which is really probably not the best move to make, especially next season, a transitionary year where you don't expect to make the playoffs anyway. With all these players, it does not make sense to buy them out next season. If you want to buy them out, you can do it at a later date, and then the penalty will be less. Now, the same goes for Pierre Engvall, and Pierre Engvall is actually an interesting case because he at times has actually shown that he can play the game that Darche wants to play. Pierre Engvall, he has the skill. The big issue has been he struggled to play the game that Patrick Roy wants to play and has really looked invisible for large portions of his Islanders career. And frankly, if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, you know he's been invisible at points throughout his entire NHL career. Still, he's shown that when he is motivated, he can play in Patrick Roy's system. And interesting enough, even though he had a really bad year in the stat sheet with only 8 goals and 7 assists in 62 games, really not what you expect, especially keeping in mind that he was not injured this season. He was scratched for 20 games. Patrick Roy did not like his game that much. However, we kind of saw in the last few games of this season, Engvall kind of figure out his game good enough where he was actually being productive in a lower line role, which is something we really haven't seen much of him in his career. And for that, at the very least, it's worth Darche at least rolling the dice and seeing what he can get out of Engvall next season. I didn't think it made sense to buy out any of these players for next year just because the Islanders realistically are not going to be contenders next season. And as a result, it makes sense, even if you do want the space, it would make more sense to send one of these guys down to the AHL if you needed $1 million here or there. Still, I know that the prospect of the Islanders largely bringing back the same team next season is not popular amongst fans, so let me know in the comments what you think about this. Would you prefer if one of those players were bought out, or do you think it makes sense for the Islanders to hold on to them at least for another season? I'd love to discuss that in the comments with you guys below. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. This is Islanders Digest. Let's go Islanders.